I think the other challenge is, I'm curious how you solve this, is figuring out who are you gonna advertise to, right? Like, were you able to get a list of like everyone who uses Stripe that sells to consumers that is like your exact target, right? Like, how did you, identify those exact people to go advertise to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, B2B enterprise, first off, is hard for advertising because you don't have as many data points, right? You don't have as many potential customers. It's not like B2C. When I worked at Point72, which is the hedge fund, I covered enterprise software. I covered Microsoft, I covered Salesforce, I covered Oracle, right? And all of these guys have earnings reports, meaning, they have to report their earnings, their performance, and compare that to what they provided for guidance, which is what they believe or forecast that they will be able to hit in terms of numbers. And somehow companies like Microsoft are always able to hit guidance. So that leads me to believe, right? Either they're sandbagging or there's some level of predictability that even at the enterprise level is feasible.
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Excited to be joined today by Qi Cao, who's the co-founder and CEO of Chargeblast, who has grown to over 1,000 customers in their first year. They're rapidly growing. But how they got here is an interesting story. And she is going to tell us more about being very quantitative and very analytical in being a founder and how that has really helped him. Before we get started, I do want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Fullscale, which is my company. I have 300 employees in the Philippines, helping dozens of other companies build all sorts of tech, no matter what your tech stack is, front end, mobile, QA, back end, all the different things. You can check us out at fullscale.io. Also want to remind you, you can sign up for our newsletter. You can go to startuphustle.xyz, or you can find me on LinkedIn and subscribe there. Look up Matt Watson, Startup Hustle. Putting out some really good content every week, so make sure you subscribe to that. Qi, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So I guess give me the quick 60 seconds about your background and what Chargeblast does to kind of get us started.
Sure. My quick background is I was raised in a small town, Rochester, Minnesota. It's surrounded by the Mayo Clinic, so lots of doctors and researchers. So my background is actually quite odd. I got my degree in molecular biology from Yale, and then didn't go into the medical path. Actually, went down more of the business route, doing a little consulting, and then did some corporate development, and then did some hedge fund work. But ultimately, decided to kind of make the jump and leverage all this broad knowledge that I've gotten to create my own company. So we founded Chargeblast just under a year ago, and Chargeblast helps merchants maintain chargeback rates near 0%. We're basically able to let the merchants know that there's been a chargeback before the payment processor knows. So that's been going pretty well, and we're excited to keep scaling the way we have been.
So that sounds like a really valuable business, and I bet it's super valuable, especially for certain e-commerce brands or SaaS companies that have people on subscriptions and all these things. But it's my understanding you had one of those companies and you had this specific problem with disputes, which has led you to actually go and start Chargeblast, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So prior to Chargeblast, my co-founders and I had a B2C subscription company that's kind of like one of those Gen AI wrappers. And the demographic we were going after were very prone to disputes. They often took their parents' credit cards or, would rather buy beer instead of paying for our service. So they sometimes charge back 3 to 6 months worth of payments. And that led us to seeing a rise in our chargeback rates. And we were kind of freaking out. We were like, oh my goodness, I don't want to get booted from Stripe, right? And ultimately, we looked around to see if there were any good solutions. And unfortunately, there weren't really any good solutions integrated with Stripe or blocked chargebacks very well with Stripe. So we decided to build out Chargeblast.
Well, it sounds, I love it when you solve like a real world problem, right? You're like, hey, we had a problem. We look around. Has anybody else solved this? Nobody else has solved it. And you're like, well, are we going to solve this thing and try and sell it to other people, right? Like that's where most business ideas come from, right? You're trying to solve something. Like a friend of mine who was a guest on the show was just trying to build custom kitchen cabinets for an outdoor kitchen, and there was no way to buy them. So he was
There
crazy
you
enough to
go.
go start a company selling kitchen cabinets, right? Like
Right.
that's where a lot of business ideas come from. But when you guys looked at that, what made you think like, hey, we're gonna pivot hard and go all in on this instead of like just solving your own problem? You guys decided to like go all in and go all for this
Right.
instead.
Well, it's a couple reasons. One of which is the space that we played in, the ChatGPT wrapper space, is really competitive. Anyone can build out a GPT wrapper, right, nowadays. So there are more popping up left and right. And the industry we played in was very seasonal as well. And the customers we dealt with, right, they like to dispute. It was a really painful business to run. We had a lot of learnings from it, but painful learnings. So we decided, look, B2B has its benefits for sure. Less churn, less seasonality. So we really leaned into Chargeblast when we started seeing some pickup in interest. So what we did kind of differently, but we leveraged our B2C background in, was we went after customers who were found on Reddit and Twitter. Other founders, right? Other founders who are making these GPT wrappers, or other founders who were just spinning up their own companies at the time who probably also saw this type of pain point. So we've got a lot of good viral traction on Twitter. Our first like couple of weeks actually, and with
Huh.
that we knew, all right, we kind of have something. Yeah, I don't know if you know Peter Levels. He's kind of an indie hacker in the Twitter sphere. Yeah, he tweeted about us, basically saying like something like this exists, like no way, right? That got around 400,000 organic views, so it drove a lot of traffic. So we kind of knew like there's something here, right? We should probably dig in a little bit more.
So, you guys pivoted and have built this company and had amazing growth over the first year. You got 1,000 or so customers. Um, so is it targeted only to people that use Stripe?
No, actually. Stripe is where our tool is most powerful. So the reason why we went after Stripe is because a solution like ours, a lot of new founders don't know exists. And a lot of new founders are on Stripe. Easy to set up, right? You're processing the next day. So we really went after Stripe because of this targeting towards new founders. And we have really powerful integrations with Stripe, allowing everything to be fully automated end to end. However, Chargeblast can be used across all processors, whether you're on Adyen, Braintree, or Shopify, right? You could use Chargeblast, and it only takes like 10 minutes to set up either way.
Okay. So how do you guys charge for this? I'm looking at your website. It says you charge $29, $19, like per dispute, like every single
Yeah.
dispute you charge.
Yeah, it's consumption based, right? And we
Okay.
decided to go after a consumption based model somewhat intentionally. There's a lot of subscription based models, right? $9.99 a month, $20 a month, $1,000 a month. But we really viewed ourselves as a critical part of a startup's growth. And we wanted to be part of that growth. So as a startup grows and starts experiencing more chargeback headaches, because we're a consumption model, we'll grow alongside with the startup because they'll have more chargebacks, right? And that allows for a more, I would say, partnership type relationship between us and the startup. We almost act as consultants for how to best optimize for their payment authorization and for their growth while avoiding fraud and chargeback.
So just to summarize this for my own understanding and the listeners, the problem you guys are trying to solve is somebody goes and they buy something for $20 or whatever, and then they dispute it. For the vendor though, they're mad. They're like, hey, they used my service. They got their $20 worth of value. But I guess your guys' value, the issue is if you get more than 1%, 2%, 3%, or whatever your charges get disputed, all of a sudden somebody like Stripe will shut you off, right? Because you get too many disputes. And
Correct.
so I guess the value is you go back to the vendor and be like, hey, you just have to eat this money. You have to give everybody a refund so that Stripe doesn't cut you off completely. I mean, is that
Right.
kind of how the way that this ends up going?
That is how it goes. And our merchants don't mind. If you think about some of these subscription software merchants, what are their gross margins? Like, what are they paying for? Maybe some AWS hosting, right? Their gross margins are 95%. Yes, obviously it costs money to acquire the customers that charge back. But at the end of the day, these guys are growing so quickly, they just want to keep on growing rather than have a headache of losing their processor. So they're more than
Well, and some
happy
of
just
them
to eat it. Yeah.
have like a money back guarantee or whatever anyways, right?
Yeah. Correct.
But instead of like, I bought some like AI headshot thing the other day where I uploaded my photos and it was supposed to give me like some beautiful headshot of
Oh,
myself or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, it didn't work very good. And so I replied back to them. I'm like, I want a refund. This thing sucks. And they're like, yes, sir, no problem. Gave my money back. If not, I
Yep.
could have disputed it. And
Correct.
I might have ended up getting the money back anyways, right? So they're just like, hey, yeah, whatever. We give some
Well,
refunds. That's just part of the deal.
I can almost guarantee you they face chargeback issues, and that's why they're so quick to give you a refund. Because if they didn't have a chargeback issue, I can guarantee you they'd fight for it a little bit harder. So a little bit of color here. Merchants lose about 80% of chargebacks.
They're gonna lose anyways.
You paid $20. You paid $20 for the headshot thing, right? $20 or so.
Yeah.
If the merchant's win rate is 20%, that means their expected value is only $4. Are they fighting for $4 every single chargeback? No, it's
Yeah.
not worth the time at that point, right? You have to collect
Yeah.
evidence, you have to submit it, and then it just becomes a headache. So they would really rather just give the money back.
So there's some other industries where this clearly is a huge problem. I'm thinking about things like OnlyFans and porn and, you know, uh, marijuana and gambling and certain mobile apps. Like, there's got to be a bunch of different verticals that people could use this. Are those all verticals that you guys would help too?
Well, yes, our services can help those types of verticals, but we actually try not to go after those types,
Okay.
largely because those are your traditional high risk verticals. And they're
Right.
already saturated with competitors who also offer a solution similar to ours.
Okay.
So, yeah, so for example, they're kind of what you would call like the sin verticals, right? Adult,
Okay.
gambling, uh, nutraceuticals, all of those are pretty well saturated with your older legacy players. While
Okay.
we've developed really good technology around folks that are used to using products like Stripe, Shopify, quick to onboard, easy to leverage, everything's automated, right? Folks that don't really know that solutions like this exist. So we go after more of the subscription e-commerce and subscription SaaS side of things as opposed to your traditional adult gambling and nutraceuticals.
So when you started this though, did you know those other vendors existed and just didn't find them, and that's what led you to start this, or they just couldn't have helped you for your
No,
scenario?
we leveraged some of the solutions and it wasn't working.
Okay.
And yeah, I guess this is a great time to talk about how we position our company. It's really simple how we position our company. Chargeblast is positioned as the most tech forward platform that allows for automation while providing white glove client service. So the issues we had with existing providers were, well, all right, we onboarded with you guys, but we're still receiving chargebacks that should be blocked. What's going on? We asked our account manager to look into it. 2 weeks later, they get back to us and they say, I don't know. And I'm here freaking out about to lose my payment processor and I can't accept payments. That's just
Yeah.
unacceptable.
About to be out of business.
I'm about to be out of business and you're taking
Yeah.
your good time to tell me you don't know, right? And that's the end of it. So we really thought like there's probably a way to do this better. And we did our research on Stripe, so we figured out exactly what went wrong. And then my background had quite a bit of consulting in it, so I kind of knew how to do client services pretty well. So you combine the two, and all of a sudden you have something that's somewhat differentiated.
Well, that's awesome. You guys have clearly created a great business. You're solving a real world problem. Got a lot of traction. Got a lot of growth. So, how did you grow and scale this thing? Did you guys raise some capital? What did you do to kind of help you get to this point?
Yep. So we haven't raised any capital yet. We are bootstrapped. And my co-founders and I, we bootstrapped both companies from the very beginning. And then we leveraged the B2C company to somewhat fund the B2B company. And now both of them are, somewhat self-sustaining. We still invest a lot into growth, obviously. But
And
the reason, yeah, well, the reason why we went the bootstrap route is because it forces you to think about unit economics. It forces you to think about whether this is a viable business or not, rather than, I'm not saying Uber is not a viable business, but Uber and Lyft, they IPO and they're incredibly unprofitable at IPO. So you still don't know whether it's a viable business or not at that point, right? I just want to make sure we had a legitimate business. Yeah.
it's like Ford right now with their electric cars, right? They lose money on every car, but they make it up in volume.
Yes. And as long as you're too big to fail, somebody's going to be there to help out, right? You raise enough money, somebody's going to be there to make sure you don't go under.
Yeah. Well, I do want to remind everybody real quick, today's episode is brought to you by Fullscale. If you need help hiring software developers, building a team, that's what we do. We help people build teams, not just find one random person to help you do some small thing. You want a long-term team, long-term partner, check us out at fullscale.io. So before we started, we were talking about one of your strong suits was being very quantitative. You're obviously a very analytical person, very business-minded. You did some corporate development, corporate finance kind of work, which probably really lends itself to that same kind of thought process. So tell me how you approach, startups now and looking at them, and you talk about the unit economics and making sure you understand your CAC and LTV and all these things. So tell me more about how you look at this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that every business that is a viable one needs at least above one LTV to CAC. Simple as that, right? And the easiest way for a entrepreneur to test whether that's the case for their business is running ads. A lot of entrepreneurs pride themselves on organic growth. I build it, I market it myself. Eventually it becomes so hot and viral that it just blows up. That's really not the case for probably 99.9% of companies. So what we did was every single thing that we wanted to trial and everything we wanted to put to market, we ran ads behind it, because that gets us thousands to millions of eyeballs telling us whether they want to buy a product or not. And if the willingness to pay for that product is greater than the cost to acquire that one customer, then you've got a viable business. Whether you need to build it up in regards to volume, right? So if your LTV to CAC is really slim, let's say 1.2, well, then you need to get a lot of volume behind that to make that 20% return really large. Or in e-commerce, LTV to CAC is sometimes like 4 or 5. That's great. You're getting a 5 times return on your customer acquisition, right? So you don't necessarily need to sell as much to generate a decent amount of profit. So that's just different ways to think about different business models and the critical pieces of addressing, the unit economics of the business models.
Well, I'm a huge fan of, if you have an early stage company trying to do that sort of testing. I will say though, not every company does this apply to. Like somebody like Fullscale, I think a lot of other service based companies, a lot of other more enterprise sales, like advertising doesn't really work very well. Like people only buy based off trust and relationships and networking, and like those types of services ads don't really do too good. But I think the other challenge is, I'm curious how you solve this, is figuring out who are you gonna advertise to, right? Like, were you able to get a list of like everyone who uses Stripe that sells to consumers that is like your exact target, right? Like, how did you identify those exact people to go advertise to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, B2B enterprise, first off, is hard for advertising because you don't have as many data points, right? You don't have as many potential customers. It's not like B2C. But what I found really interesting and what I truly believe in, and we're still working on this at Chargeblast. I'm not saying we have everything solved at Chargeblast, but when I worked in the when I worked at Point 72, which is the hedge fund, I covered enterprise software. I covered Microsoft, I covered Salesforce, I covered Oracle, right? And all of these guys have earnings reports, meaning, they have to report their earnings, their performance, and compare that to what they provided for guidance, which is what they believe or forecast that they will be able to hit in terms of numbers. And somehow companies like Microsoft are always able to hit guidance. So that leads me to believe, right? Either they're sandbagging or there's some level of predictability that even at the enterprise level is feasible. So that's what we're striving for at Chargeblast. I can tell you it's definitely not there yet, but over time, I hope, we'll get to that point. But in regards to how we know who we're advertising to, I think it helped that we were our first customer to a degree, right? So we built this out because of our own pain points. So we kind of knew what a potential customer could look like. And we built our Google search ads, as well as some Twitter ads and Reddit ads to target that type of niche. Early stage founders or building something B2C and has a subscription layer to it.
Okay.
And that has demonstrated pretty good returns so far. We don't have it down to down to a basis point, but like we do have a general sense that it does work.
Yeah, it's always one of the struggles that I have, even at full scale, is trying to figure out who is our target accounts that we're going after, because in all of these tools like LinkedIn, Apollo, all these different things exist. You can't really get a list of who is a SaaS company or who is a software company because they're across industry. Like
Right.
there are software companies in every industry, so it's really difficult. But hopefully, in your case, like you can find people that find lists, wherever they use Stripe or whatever, that to help you kind of narrow into that. So I'm curious, what other advice do you have about being quantitative as it goes being a founder?
Sure. So one piece of advice is focusing on margin. It's not always about number of users. It's not always about revenue growth. A lot of it really is about expanding your margin. And something that we did as an exercise recently is how can we grow without expanding headcount, right? Pretty simple. Headcount costs a lot of money. Growth also costs a lot of money. So as you're growing, how do you make sure you're growing faster than your headcount? And how can we leverage technology to help out with that? And so we were seeing probably 800 live chats initiated every single month. And those were all handled by humans. Our fantastic support in the Philippines, can't rely on them enough. They're great. But it really puts a lot of time, pressure on our support team, and it's stressful dealing with humans, right? So we leveraged these AI chatbots or HubSpot's chatbot, and that was able to reduce the number of human handled live chats by half.
Okay.
That's huge. That means I can double my business and not increase a single person on that team, right? Because they were able to support 800 before, and now they're really only doing 400 because the live chat's doing the other, or the chatbot's doing the other 400. So thinking about ways to tackle your margins, it could be as simple as implementing a chatbot, right? Is great because then you're driving free cash flow back into either your pockets or back into the growth of your business. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it takes a lot of data tracking. Not everyone likes that. Not everyone likes to track how many live chats there are, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, we just did this at full scale, saved well over $10,000 a month actually by canceling Slack and moving most of our employees away from Google Workspace and using Zoho. And we canceled
really,
HubSpot. Yeah,
really,
canceled HubSpot, moved it all to Zoho. And actually Zoho Click works really well. I don't miss Slack at all, not for one day. No, I don't miss it.
wow.
Um, but
I
we
might
have
have to
300
do that.
yeah, we have 300 employees, and when you get to a certain
Uh,
number with Google Workspace, they force you to the enterprise plan. So the enterprise plan is something like $25-$30 a month per employee. And you
oh
got
my
300
goodness.
of them. All of
Yeah,
a sudden, it becomes a bigger number. Where something like Zoho is like $5, $6, $10 a month or whatever.
right,
It's so much less expensive. Same thing with HubSpot. We were spending
right,
like $3,000 a month or something on it. So yeah, we just did a whole round of this kind of stuff in the first quarter and saved ourselves a ton of money that all goes directly to the bottom line, to your point, like
right,
directly to profit.
right. Well, we might have to do that because we use Google Workspace, Slack, and HubSpot. So
Yeah.
you were using we were using the same tech stack you were. So we might have to look into that.
Well, they're not very expensive when you have 5, 10, 20 employees or whatever, right? But at some point in time you get to scale and you're like, man, this is really adding up. It's like it gets to be
Right.
pricey. So
Makes sense.
what other tips do you have about being quantitative and thinking about all the numbers as a founder? I love the cost saving margin part of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say even when you're going to conferences, you can drive an ROI. So a lot of folks see conferences as qualitative. You're there to meet people, you're there to drive partnerships, you're there to show off your brand, make sure people are aware of Chargeblast. But there is a cost you're spending on those conferences, right? They're not cheap. Ticket can go for $3,000. If you get a booth, that's another 12 grand, right? You got flights maybe all the way across. I'm in New York. So maybe I'll have to go to San Francisco. That's
A
not cheap,
long ways.
right? It's a long ways and it feels horrible. And you got three of us going there, right? We're all mostly based on the East Coast. So now all of a sudden the conference costs $20,000, $25,000. You got to make that money back somehow. And I can tell you, I'm not paying $25,000 just to drive awareness. I'd rather put that into my Google Ads Manager, right? That could drive a lot more returns, predictable returns, than going to a conference. So even with the conference, right? We track all of our leads. We track all of our partnerships. We have estimates on how many chargebacks the lead or the partnership could drive. We have estimated returns looking at our unit economics, and based on the conversations, we know, hey, maybe Shop Talk is not the conference we want to go to. Well, maybe Stripe Sessions is the conference we want to go to, right? Based off of these numbers. So our next year's conference circuit is going to look a lot different because we have the data from this year's.
Yeah, you were supposed to go to SaaS Open and weren't able to go, and I really enjoyed that. It was in Austin, and it's going to be again in New York in September, I think. And I didn't go and have a booth. I'm like you. I didn't spend the money. I'm like, I don't know if it makes sense to spend 10 grand or whatever it is to be a sponsor, but I just went, sponsored a little dinner, and I think we'll get one or two customers out of it, right? Like the ROI
Right.
was there. Where if I would have spent all the money on the booth, I'm not sure if the ROI would have been any better. So that's the
No.
hard thing about being a founder. And actually, at one of my previous companies, we spent a whole bunch of money to be a sponsor at some software development conference, which is who our target was. And I don't think we got any ROI out of it all. Like it's so
Right.
hard early stage with trying to figure out where do you spend your advertising money and where it works. And
Right.
As you're talking about earlier, like you want to try and grow organic, but at the same time, you got to spend money and then actually quantify if you're getting a return on it. And
Right.
you're right, digital advertising is so much easier because you can really see the numbers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a general sense, like if SaaS Open was good for you, well, maybe that means you should get a booth next year, right? Maybe you should
Yeah.
double down on it, right? So it's always good to have quantitative information to guide your decision. So it's less emotional and just more objective.
Well, so I do want to ask you about the AI bubble because you had a company that was kind of based on generative AI, and so I'm curious. Do you feel like there's a bubble here that's about to burst, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't have to say whether I think it already has burst. So generative AI was incredibly hot in at the end of 22, beginning of 23, right? Lots of venture capitalists were getting in. If you weren't investing in generative AI, you weren't doing your job as a VC. But now, what folks are seeing, and based on what I've heard in the space, is no one can raise another round for their Gen AI company because their last round they raised at 20 times revenue or something like that.
Yeah.
And now the VCs are realizing I can't sell this Gen AI company for more than 2 times revenue. Well, I'm not putting any more money into that, right? So right now we're seeing some of our prior or some of the folks in Gen AI just kind of wind down because they didn't build their business in a manner that was self-sustaining, and they didn't find out what worked and what didn't. They were just relying on the venture money, and now they're starting to wind down.
Well, in your point earlier, a lot of them were just a thin wrapper around, OpenAI or whatever. Like they just had some special prompts and different workflow, which is great, which is fine. But it's not. Some of them weren't enough to be like a real product. They were kind of a feature or like
Mm-hmm.
real simple little thing that they did. And like a good example of this was like there was some company that raised like $100 million to do some like software development, AI related stuff, and then like this week GitHub releases some stuff that I think pretty much just does whatever they were trying to do. That's like
Right,
free part of GitHub now. So we're
right.
going to continue to see more and more of that too, where people had these like weird little feature things, and now some of these other bigger platforms are finally adopting some of those little features.
This is, I think, the one instance where the enterprise or larger players have a much bigger advantage versus the startups. Usually the startups can take some share or really become a competitor because they're lean and they're agile. But the Gen AI space is really dependent on data. The more data you have, the more powerful your product is going to be. And who has all the data? Well, it's definitely not startups. It's the legacy players like Salesforce, Microsoft, ServiceNow, all these large enterprises with tens or hundreds of thousands of customers and their data already sitting there. Versus, like you said, people are building features that can easily be replicated. You can spin up a
Yeah,
Gen AI company over a weekend, right? So,
I agree with you. I think the best use of Gen AI was to build features into existing platforms. There's some companies like their entire companies based around it, but a lot of them are just building those features. And another example of this was Greg DeVore, who was is one of the founders of Screen Steps, who was just on the show. May have been just before this one publishes, but they build like a knowledge base software, right? So now using Gen AI, to build like chatbots or do different things to help import data into the knowledge base and all that kind of stuff. It was like amazing use cases for them. Like it was, but those just create new features for their system. It wasn't like a whole business
right.
around Gen AI. It was features. And so interesting time for somebody like him. It was like amazing.
Definitely. I mean, you could definitely have made money off of that, opportunity of time when it was really hot. But now the bigger guys are building out and launching their products, and folks are getting squashed left and right.
Yeah. Well, so what do you see as the future for Chargeblast? What's next?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much on our plate. We can't really see 5 steps ahead of us, you know. I only see my toes. But I would say Charge Blast will probably keep developing its chargeback mitigations suite. So there's certainly a lot more things we can offer, like consumer clarity, for example, where basically when a chargeback happens, we can send information to the credit card companies to show, hey, this guy actually used the company's services for the past 6 months, and here's all the usage data. It's friendly fraud, right?
Right.
So we can actually block friendly fraud when it happens. Of course, it's still up to the issuer to decide whether it is or is not friendly fraud, but that's another solution that is on the near horizon. And then we really have to figure out whether we want to dive deeper into the fraud space, because there's a lot of fraud and chargeback mitigation companies, or maybe we look into the subscription space, since a lot of our customers are subscription customers. So it's still TBD, but we're moving as fast as we can while building the ship and avoiding mountains. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, do you have any key advice for other entrepreneurs out there who are listening? Problems you've run into, problems you had to solve? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the vertical you're in, relationships matter a lot. We're in the FinTech space, which is pretty much, dominated by Visa, MasterCard. They're the ones that built out all the infrastructure, right? Everyone else is just kind of building on top of the infrastructure. So developing relationships and making sure you work well with other people in the ecosystem is absolutely critical, because as a startup, a lot of the times founders want to be disruptive. Well, look, no one is going to like a disruptive startup that's throwing vases and dishes on the floor of someone else's house, right? So make sure you build out good relationships and make sure you work well with people, even your competitors, because at the end of the day, you really don't want more headwinds for yourself, and you just want to keep on building on those tailwinds.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Again, this was Qi Cao. You can check him out at chargeblast.com, your company. If anybody needs help building software, need software developers, check us out at fullscale.io. Please sign up for our newsletter at startuphustle.xyz. Well, Qi, thank you so much for being on the show today, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Matt. Great speaking with you.
All right. Thank you so much.